Hello once again. This is the CDH Dad and
the CDH Warrior.
And welcome back to another Mondays on Mondays episode. For those of you that have seen in the past, basically let's do the disclaimer that we are not medical professionals. We don't have any background in psychology, sociology, anything like that. But in my family, we have been dealing with children with special needs for almost 30 years. My son was a CDH. I have a daughter who was aplastic anemia and required a bone marrow transplant. So between both of the children, we've been through a lot of issues involving family health, child health, and the issues associated with that. And we've started this discussion just so that we can have a chance to talk about some of the issues that come up that are outside the typical medical problems and more with the family side of how we do this. So it gives us a chance to at least have an open discussion about some of those things. A little later in the broadcast, in this video, you will see a email address that will be included on the screen so that if you have any questions, you can contact that.
We do check that. So
yes, and it's also one, a lot of our discussions come from some of the social media boards and groups that we're involved with, where we listen to the discussions of other parents and families that are going through these issues. In most cases, these are families that are just beginning their journey, particularly in CDH, sometimes with aplastic anemia or with graft versus host disease, which is a sideline of that. But the biggest thing we look at is what are the longer term issues that parents want to talk about and deal with, because as my son does a segment on Thursdays, which is We Survive, Now What? Which is basically, okay, after you've been through these issues and you have a child that's been through these issues, what happens as they become teenagers, adolescents, young adults going to college, start their own lives, and how does that impact? So that's the main reason for this discussion group, so we appreciate, once again, your joining us.
With that, let's roll the title.
Okay, and welcome back from the introduction. Once again, this is the CDH Dad and
the CDH Warrior.
And our topic today is really a discussion that came up this week in a group where it was talking about dealing with and the relationship with the healthcare professionals that you deal with in the early phases of your child. Because in general, we're talking about children under 5 going through medical issues, the parents having to deal and interact with that. But then also you want to discuss, okay, how do you deal with the long-term issues with that? Because I know in particular with CDH, and I know it's the same thing with aplastic anemia and those type things, that over a period of time, you move on and you move into different aspects of your life and different parts of what your normal life would be. And then you start trying to deal with issues like that, but something may crop up, and then you've got an issue, because in most cases when you're dealing with a young child with a medical condition, you're dealing with a medical center and a staff that specifically deals with that condition and that situation, and they're going to be working in and out of that. But when you go into real life, many times you're going to be moved away from the medical center. You're going to be in a different area, a different situation. And I know in our case, we're dealing with children that have very unique medical conditions. And it's not a matter of you can just go into a regular emergency clinic, urgent care center, or even an emergency room and have doctors and specialists that really have an understanding of what that condition is. Yeah, I know with CDH, congenital diaphragmatic hernia, we've discussed the fact that it's, what, 1 in 4,000 roughly?
4,000, roughly.
And up until just the last 20 years, survival was only 50%. So that means, 1 in 8,000. So it's a very limited number of young people that are dealing with the long-term issues dealing with these conditions. With congenital diaphragmatic hernia, you're going to be concerned about the pulmonary function, the cardio function, the GI tract. Does the diaphragm reherniate? I know with aplastic anemia, there's concerns about the long-term effects of to do aplastic anemia, and what we did there was having to do a bone marrow stem cell transplant, which meant total body irradiation, heavy doses of chemotherapy, all of those type things. So what are the long-term effects there? So these are things that are not standard for most doctors to look at. And part of the discussion we've had previously is, when you're dealing with a child with these type of situations, you really want to deal with doctors that, when they hear the hoofbeats, they look for zebras, not horses. And most doctors are trained to look for the most basic cause of something first, and then escalate up. You're not going to look for, the rare conditions and the rare medical issues in terms of the symptoms that you see. But when you've got a child with the special needs, sometimes you need to work that direction. You need to see where those things are. So these are the type of things that we wanted to discuss. I know part of what brought me to this was a discussion because it did come up in one of the groups, and I used the example that we still stay in contact with some of our medical providers in various ways, and I know you're still in contact with the surgeon that did most of your repairs and basically pioneered some of the CDH protocols.
Yeah.
But in an instance, just as an example, we were with my daughter for a dance recital, and our kids were mid-late teens, so
I think
probably 16 or 17. No.
Because if I recall correctly, that was June of 2014.
Okay.
If I recall...
So you would have been 19.
I literally turned 19 while I was in the hospital. While I was in the ER.
Okay.
Because it was May, the last day of May, 1st of June.
Okay. You may remember this better than I do, but anyway, in this situation is one that, I don't know, do you want to relay that you were kind of feeling some respiratory issues?
I was feeling terrible. I was having respiratory issues. I was short of breath, and I was trying to, I had just gone through it was right after I went through that A&P course. We did the referred pain that last week. And that was still fresh in my mind, and it's like, wait a minute. I was having pain right about here, which is also about where my patch was anyway. And it was basically radiating up. So my first thought was, did the patch come loose? Was it a lung problem? And I remember my biggest problem when we were in the ER was trying to refer to them of, look at the lungs. Because all they wanted to do was do EKGs on me, and that wasn't going to fix or diagnose anything.
Right, and as I remember, we were at dinner after the recital, and you were noting the pain, the problems and the concerns, and you texted the surgeon that did the repairs on this, and he came back with recommendations on what to tell the ER doctors to look for.
Yeah.
So, many times when you're dealing with this type of situation, it's a critical situation. And as I said, most regular ER doctors, even though they're very good, are not going to think in that concept of it could be a reherniation of the diaphragm. They're going to look at the other general causes. Fortunately, I think the doctor had given you some recommendations to pass along to the doctors when we went to the ER that would suggest what they look for. We were fortunate that your diaphragm had not reherniated, but that's a unique situation because we expected that during growth and development through the years, this patch was made, the patch was attached to a rib, so as you grew, expanded, your ribs grew, everything else moved, there's a very good possibility that this would break loose and cause a reherniation. And reherniation with a congenital diaphragmatic hernia, a reherniation of the diaphragm, it's not an immediate death sentence, but there are other issues that can be concerned. One is difficulty in breathing. The second is once you have that barrier between the abdomen and the lung cavity, is that organs can migrate up into there and cause other long-term issues, potentially a GI obstruction or strangulation of.
Well, GI obstruction and lung hypoplasia.
Yeah.
I mean, most of us already have issues with hypoplastic lungs anyway on the side that our original hernia was. But when you have reherniation, you can also worry about the fact that it can make that worse by either damaging the lung tissue or compressing it.
Right. So really, part of what we want to talk about is not necessarily the medical issues on this, but it's a matter of, even though it's been almost 30 years since we went through this, we still have contact with the physician involved and some of the other medical professionals and some of the therapists and others involved. So with time, as things may bring up questions, we've got someone that can go back to a baseline and help provide some information from that standpoint. And this is one of the things we wanted to bring out, is that as parents and as families and as the children that are dealing through this, is you need to work into some type of a professional, medical, social support group so that you can contact this and go through these. And many doctors have no problems, being available to provide some information and help in this when these things arise, because they've got a medical specialty, and even though it's been a long time, they can remember some of the details and some of the things to look for, and they know from dealing with many other children with these similar type issues what to expect in the longer term, because if we continue to keep that social network in place, then they're going to be dealing with other former patients in their teens and 20s that now are having issues, and hopefully they become a database and support group in those type things.
Well, I hate to cut you off there, but I wanted to bring out, so I think this has been about 2 years ago, 2 years ago, I was tasked by, I was tasked by a member of the nonprofit that I work for to figure out, because everyone puts, and I'm not trying to downplay somebody, I'm just putting this out there. One of the biggest issues that I see in our community is David pays is automatically the answer.
Well,
But-
you consider that Dr. David Case developed the protocol back in the 1990s. It's now used for congenital diaphragmatic hernia treatments.
Yeah.
It is the better recognized
It is considered
treatment.
the gold standard.
Right.
But what I wanted to bring up is, it's not necessarily a person that you are looking for. It is a method. It is a methodology for treatment that you're looking for.
Well, and that's the case for the early phases of CDH and the early phases of children with that condition. But you've got to deal with, once you get past that, you kind of have some standard steps that you go through. And depending on what happens at various stages, you may have to go into heart-lung bypass, those type of things.
Yeah.
There may be reherniation, other issues in the early phases. You've had a reherniation within really just a week of the first repair. But we need to look at the longer-term effects and what can happen there. As I said, I have a daughter that's was aplastic anemia, which basically the bone marrow shut down. Her body produced no blood cells. So we had to do a stem cell bone marrow transplant to reactivate her blood system. And as a result of that, we had to do the chemo and the radiation and then watch over time the effects of that. Now, where we talk about the long-term issues, like I said, we talk a lot about CDH, but I want to include the other in this, because part of this is not just CDH and aplastic anemia children. That's a limited group. But we want to open this forum up to all families that have children with special needs and what kind of things to expect. But in this case, like I said, with the chemo, radiation, and the stem cell transplant, longer term, we have to deal with what damage did the chemo and radiation do to the body, because it's expected that, there are potential for radiation damage in some of the organs. Mm-hmm. There are concerns about, with a stem cell transplant or a bone marrow transplant, you will end up what's called graft versus host disease. Some of those of you that may be familiar with organ transplant,
It's the same principle.
It's a reverse principle, basically, because with an organ transplant, your body, your blood system looks and says, wait a minute, that kidney or that liver or that lung, that's not the same DNA, that's not the same part of our body as the rest of it. So we look at attacking that organ because it's a strange organ. And these children in those situations will be on a lifetime of anti-rejection medicine to keep the body from, the blood system from attacking that organ. In the case of a bone marrow transplant, stem cell transplant, what you're looking at is your blood system looks at every part of the body and can say, wait a minute, that's not part of us. So the attacks can go into the heart, the lungs, the kidneys, the liver, anything that's part of your organ system that your blood system says, wait a minute, that's not me. I need to put together the antibodies and all of the immune system to get rid of that foreign body. Now, in my daughter's case, the biggest issue we had was with the skin. And we don't think of the skin, but the skin is basically the largest organ the body has. And in her case, the blood system attacked her skin. And it took quite a while for us to work with the doctors, because we were dealing with our local doctors and pediatricians and those folks, and pushing to get a lot of things done, and finally getting a biopsy made where they were able to look at a lesion that she had on her arm, and they were able to send that off, have a biopsy done, and it says, yes, it is basically, this is graft versus host disease. The body is attacking. Now, as I said, with regular organ transplants, if it's a kidney, a liver, something like that, major organs, you're on an anti-rejection for life. With a bone marrow transplant, it's usually 1 to 2 years that there's an anti-rejection, steroids, those type of things that are utilized to suppress the immune system so that you can recover.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't necessarily take care of the problem long term.
No.
My daughter is in her mid-20s. She still has flare-ups from basically rashes that look like psoriasis or those type of things, because her blood system is still attacking her skin. She does still have to have her doctor, just keep an eye out for issues that may show that her bone marrow or her blood system is affecting other organs. In her teens, we had a pediatric cardiologist basically do a systems check just to make sure we didn't see anything there. So we knew that 10 years plus, everything looked good. But it's still one that every few years you want to make sure that you let your doctor know and examine these type things. One of the things my son brought up is that, very young, with a ophthalmologist visit, the eye doctor was able to look and say she has a small cataract in one eye. It could be from the radiation, it could be from whatever. So it's something that has to be monitored every few years when she goes in for an eye exam to see, has it changed? Is there a difference in the baseline? Are those type of things changing? So really the discussion we wanted to have here is, yes, you may be past the critical stage with the health care of your child in whatever condition they have after the medical center and the medical professionals have taken care of that. But it does help to still have contact with those doctors to deal with the long-term effects that come into play and be able to provide some input and suggestions on that. Part of the reason we also bring that up is we're in a family that we have moved numerous times, which means we have not had the same doctors and medical professionals and support, through the years. It's changed from place to place to place. We've been fortunate. Where we were in Georgia, we had some doctors that really worked very closely with us and helped us. It helped that we were friends and neighbors with the doctor who was over the South Georgia Health Department and was able to help with the contacts there. And we knew another number of doctors and helped in that phase. When we moved, we were in Virginia. We were fortunate that we were able to find a pediatrician who had been a specialized pediatric illness doctor and had worked in emergency situations and understood that, and had gotten to a point where he needed to just take a break from the pressure of that. So he opened up a pediatrics office. But that gave us someone who, as I said, would look for the zebras when he heard something, would look for the longer issues, and had some idea of what he was looking for. So these are the top things as families, as parents, as survivors of whatever that condition is as a child, that you need to deal with is just keep aware of the long-term issues. Make sure that you still have some contact with the baseline of people that were in the early phases of your treatment and recovery and support, and discuss with them, if something comes up and if there is a concern about something, what should you mention to the doctor? Because it's not something that you can easily Google.
Yeah.
Because a lot of this is very limited information, because a lot of these conditions are rare.
Yeah.
But that's the focus that we wanted to have for this session. So,
I
did you
think
have
that
anything
pretty
else?
much about wraps it up.
Okay. Well, thank you once again for joining us for Mondays on Mondays. Have a great week.
See you next time.